One of the hardest things to accept in any relationship is silence, not an argument, not a breakup, not someone saying they don't care anymore. Silence. Because silence leaves room for imagination, and imagination has a way of becoming your worst enemy. You start asking questions that have no answers. Did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I text again? Maybe they're just busy. Before long, you've created a dozen explanations for behavior that should have required only one observation. Here's what I've learned. When someone can go days without talking to you, don't rush to explain their silence. Pay attention to it. Silence is information. It may not tell you everything, but it tells you something important. It tells you where communication stands in their priorities at that moment. Now, that doesn't automatically mean they don't care. Life gets complicated. People have demanding jobs, family responsibilities, personal struggles, and moments when they need space. But there's a difference between someone who occasionally becomes occupied by life and someone who consistently leaves you wondering where you stand. Healthy relationships don't leave one person carrying all the emotional responsibility while the other disappears whenever it's convenient. Psychology teaches us something fascinating about uncertainty. Human beings are wired to seek closure. Our brains dislike unanswered questions. So when communication suddenly stops, we instinctively try to fill in the missing pieces. The problem is that we usually don't fill those gaps with facts. We fill them with fear. We replay conversations. We analyze every text message. We wonder whether one sentence, one joke, or one mistake caused everything to change. But here's the danger. When you become obsessed with finding reasons for someone else's silence, you slowly stop paying attention to your own emotional well-being. Your focus shifts from, is this relationship healthy for me, to how do I make this person respond? Those are two completely different questions, and only one of them protects your peace. This is where self-worth often gets tested. Many people unconsciously believe that if they can just say the right thing, become more understanding, more patient, or more available, they'll earn consistent attention. But genuine connection isn't something you negotiate by sacrificing your dignity. Respect isn't built through desperation. Affection isn't strengthened by chasing someone who has chosen distance. Think about it this way. Imagine watering a plant every single day while the roots are no longer alive. You can pour more water. You can buy better fertilizer. You can move it into better sunlight. None of those actions change the condition of the roots. Your effort cannot revive something that isn't responding. Relationships work much the same way. Effort matters, but effort must be mutual. One person cannot create connection alone. Philosophers have long argued that reality becomes clearer when we stop resisting it. One of the greatest sources of suffering isn't reality itself. It's our refusal to accept what reality is showing us. We become attached to potential instead of paying attention to patterns. We tell ourselves, maybe next week things will be different. Maybe after work calms down. Maybe after this stressful season. Sometimes those hopes are justified. Often they become excuses that keep us emotionally trapped. Actions have always spoken more honestly than explanations. Anyone can say they're busy. Anyone can promise they'll call tomorrow. Anyone can explain why they disappeared. But consistency is difficult to fake. It reveals intention over time. That's why patterns matter more than isolated moments. A single missed phone call means very little. Repeated emotional absence tells a much larger story. One mistake people make is confusing patience with self-neglect. Patience is a virtue when two people are building something together. Self-neglect begins when patience becomes permission for someone else to repeatedly ignore your emotional needs. There's wisdom in giving people grace. There's also wisdom in recognizing when grace has turned into an excuse for accepting less than you deserve. Notice something else about silence. It creates a mirror. While you're waiting for another person to reach out, you're forced to confront your relationship with yourself. Why does this silence feel unbearable? Is it because you genuinely miss the person, or because their attention has become the measure of your value? Those are difficult questions, but they're necessary ones. If your confidence rises and falls based on whether someone texts you back, then your emotional foundation has been built on something you cannot control. Real confidence comes from internal stability. It comes from knowing who you are before someone validates you and still knowing who you are when they don't. That kind of confidence isn't loud or arrogant. It's quiet. It doesn't beg for reassurance because it doesn't depend on constant approval. It understands that another person's behavior reflects their choices, not your worth. The truth is, people make time for what consistently matters to them. It may not happen immediately. It may not happen exactly when you want it, but sustained effort reveals genuine investment. If someone repeatedly demonstrates that reaching out isn't important to them, believe the behavior instead of arguing with the evidence. That doesn't mean responding with anger or revenge. Silence doesn't have to be answered with bitterness. Sometimes the strongest response is calm acceptance. Instead of chasing answers, you redirect your energy toward your own growth. You stop measuring your value by someone else's availability. You allow their actions to provide clarity rather than confusion. Ironically, this shift changes everything. When you stop chasing, you regain perspective. You stop operating from fear and begin making decisions from self respect. Whether they eventually reach out becomes less important because you've already reclaimed something far more valuable: your peace of mind. And here's the lesson I want you to remember: never let someone else's silence become louder than your own self respect. When you learn to treat silence as information instead of a challenge to your worth, you stop chasing validation and start protecting your peace. And that's where real strength begins. Once you begin to understand that another person's silence is information instead of a verdict on your worth, something important happens. The emotional energy you spent trying to decode them suddenly becomes available for something much more valuable: yourself. And that's where the real transformation begins. Most people think the solution is getting the other person to text back. It isn't. The real solution is reaching a point where your emotional stability no longer depends on whether they do. Now, I know that's easier said than done. We live in a world where our phones have become emotional barometers. A notification can lift your mood. An unanswered message can ruin your day. We have connected our sense of security to little sounds and glowing screens. The problem is that when your peace is controlled by someone else's response time, you've handed over your emotional freedom without even realizing it. Think about how quickly this cycle develops. Someone doesn't answer, so you send another message, then another. Hours turn into days, and suddenly you're checking your phone every few minutes. You're rereading old conversations, watching social media activity, trying to figure out why they can post a picture but can't answer your text. Before long, you're no longer living your life. You're monitoring theirs. Psychologists describe this as a shift in attention. Instead of directing your focus toward what you can influence, you become consumed by something you cannot control. The more attention you give to another person's unpredictable behavior, the less attention you give to your own growth. And that's one of the greatest hidden costs of chasing someone. It doesn't just exhaust you emotionally, it distracts you from becoming the person you're capable of becoming. Here's a truth that many people resist because it feels uncomfortable. You cannot make another person value you by valuing them more. Read that again in your mind. Love doesn't work on a point system. Relationships are not negotiations where extra effort automatically earns equal effort in return. If they were, every relationship would succeed simply because one person tried hard enough. But life doesn't work that way. Attraction, respect, and commitment grow from mutual investment, not one-sided sacrifice. That's why constantly chasing someone often produces the opposite result of what you intended. It sends a subtle message, not because you're unworthy, but because your behavior communicates uncertainty. Human beings naturally pay attention to what appears secure and emotionally grounded. When your happiness seems dependent on another person's approval, you unintentionally shift the balance of the relationship. Now, this isn't about pretending not to care. Some people misunderstand this idea and think emotional independence means becoming cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. That's not confidence. That's self protection disguised as strength. Real confidence is different. Real confidence allows you to care deeply without losing yourself. It allows you to love someone without making them responsible for your identity. It means you can appreciate someone's presence without collapsing when they're absent. There's tremendous freedom in that. Philosophers have often argued that the highest form of freedom isn't controlling the world around you, it's mastering your response to it. You may not control who calls. You may not control who leaves. You may not control who changes their mind, but you always have influence over the direction of your own life. That's why your focus has to return to the one person you actually have authority over. Ask yourself some honest questions. What goals have I delayed because I was waiting for someone else's attention? What friendships have I neglected while obsessing over one relationship? What opportunities have I ignored because my emotional energy has been trapped in uncertainty? Sometimes the greatest loss isn't the relationship. It's the version of yourself you abandoned while trying to save it. Think about how many dreams people postpone because they're emotionally waiting for a message, waiting for an apology, waiting for clarity, waiting for someone else to decide whether they're enough. Meanwhile, life keeps moving. Days become months. Months become years. And one morning they wake up realizing they spent more time waiting to be chosen than choosing themselves. That realization is painful, but it can also become the beginning of wisdom. When you redirect your attention inward, something remarkable starts to happen. You remember that your life has purpose beyond one relationship. You begin investing in your health because you deserve to feel strong. You pursue your career because your future matters. You reconnect with family and friends because meaningful relationships extend far beyond romance. You develop hobbies, skills, and experiences that remind you you're a complete person, not half of someone else's story. Ironically, this shift often changes how other people see you. Not because you're playing games, not because you're following some strategy designed to manipulate someone's emotions, but because confidence is visible, purpose is visible, peace is visible. People notice when someone carries themselves with quiet assurance instead of constant neediness. They notice when your conversations become richer because you've been living instead of waiting. They notice when your smile comes from genuine fulfillment rather than temporary validation. And here's the beautiful part: whether they notice or not becomes less important. That's the paradox most people miss. The moment you genuinely stop making another person's attention the center of your emotional world is the moment you reclaim ownership of your own life. If they return, you're no longer desperate. If they don't, you're no longer devastated. Either way, you've won something that no relationship can give you and no rejection can take away. Inner stability. This doesn't happen overnight. You'll still have moments where you're tempted to check your phone one more time. You'll still wonder whether they're thinking about you. You're human. Emotions don't disappear because you've heard good advice. What changes is your response. Instead of chasing, you breathe. Instead of pleading, you grow. Instead of shrinking your world around one person's choices, you expand your own. That's emotional maturity. Steve Harvey has often emphasized that you have to know your value before expecting someone else to recognize it. There's wisdom in that idea because value isn't something another person creates. They simply recognize what's already there. If you don't believe your own life has meaning independent of someone else's attention, no amount of affection will permanently convince you otherwise. Your purpose existed before they entered your life. Your talents existed before they noticed you. Your future will continue whether they stay or leave. Never forget that. Because the strongest people aren't the ones who never experience rejection. They're the ones who refuse to let rejection define their identity. They understand that every minute spent chasing someone who is pulling away is a minute stolen from building the life they're meant to live. So instead of asking, how do I get them to notice me? Ask a better question. Am I becoming someone I can be proud of, regardless of who notices? That's the question that changes lives. Because the moment you stop chasing people and start pursuing purpose, you discover something extraordinary. The person you've been searching for your whole life has been waiting for your attention too. And that person is you. By this point, you've already begun to see two important truths. First, another person's silence is not a measurement of your worth. It's information about their priorities. Second, the healthiest response isn't chasing them. It's redirecting your energy toward becoming emotionally grounded and deeply invested in your own life. Once those lessons begin to take root, there's one final step that changes everything. You have to let actions make the decision that words keep postponing. One of the greatest mistakes people make in relationships is giving more weight to promises than to patterns. We want to believe what someone says because hope is comforting. Hope tells us tomorrow will be different. Hope whispers that if we're patient enough, understanding enough, loving enough, eventually everything will fall into place. Hope is powerful, but hope without evidence becomes denial. There's a difference between believing in someone's potential and ignoring their reality. Potential is what a person could become. Reality is what they consistently choose to be. Relationships are not built on potential. They're built on repeated choices, repeated effort, and repeated demonstrations of care. Think about every healthy relationship you've ever admired. Whether it was your grandparents, close friends, or a couple you've respected for years, none of those relationships survived because one person kept making excuses for the other. They survived because both people kept showing up. That's what commitment looks like. It isn't perfection. It isn't never making mistakes. It's showing up consistently, even when life becomes difficult. Psychologists often say that trust isn't created by grand gestures. It's created by predictability. Human beings feel emotionally safe when words and actions align over time. Every kept promise strengthens trust. Every broken promise weakens it. Eventually, people stop listening to explanations because explanations can be manufactured. Consistency cannot. That's why actions are always more honest than intentions. Someone may genuinely intend to call you. They may sincerely mean every apology they give. They may truly believe they'll change. But intentions don't build relationships. Behavior does. This distinction matters because many people stay emotionally trapped by confusing what someone wants with what someone repeatedly does. They tell themselves, I know they love me. Maybe they do. But love that never becomes consistent action leaves the other person carrying uncertainty instead of security. Real love doesn't eliminate challenges, but it does eliminate confusion about effort. You shouldn't have to wonder every week whether someone cares enough to communicate. You shouldn't have to decode mixed signals like they're puzzles waiting to be solved. You shouldn't have to constantly earn attention that should naturally exist within a healthy connection. The philosopher Aristotle once observed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, he argued, is not an isolated act but a habit. The same principle applies to relationships. Respect is a habit. Honesty is a habit. Reliability is a habit. Love, expressed through action, becomes a habit. So instead of asking, what did they mean when they said this? Begin asking, what pattern have they shown me over the last several months? Patterns rarely lie. A single mistake deserves grace. A recurring pattern deserves attention. This doesn't mean becoming cynical. It doesn't mean assuming the worst in people or refusing to forgive. Forgiveness is healthy. Compassion is necessary. Everyone deserves room to grow. But forgiveness and wisdom must walk together. Forgiveness allows you to release resentment. Wisdom helps you recognize whether anything has actually changed. Too often, people confuse forgiveness with permission. They forgive the same behavior repeatedly without requiring any evidence of growth. Over time, they become trapped in a cycle of disappointment because they keep believing each new promise while ignoring the history that came before it. History matters, not because people are incapable of change, but because genuine change always leaves evidence. Someone who has changed communicates differently. They behave differently. They prioritize differently. They become consistent where they were once inconsistent. Change isn't announced, it's demonstrated. Now, here's where this becomes deeply personal. You also have to allow your own actions to match your values. It's easy to say, I deserve respect. It's much harder to stop accepting disrespect. It's easy to say, I know my worth. It's much harder to walk away from situations that repeatedly challenge that belief. Character isn't revealed by what we claim to value. It's revealed by what we're willing to tolerate. Every time you ignore your own standards because you're afraid of losing someone, you quietly teach yourself that fear matters more than self-respect. That's a dangerous lesson. Because eventually you stop asking whether the relationship is healthy. You only ask whether it's still available. Availability is not the same thing as compatibility. Someone can be available and still be emotionally unavailable. Someone can return your calls while never truly investing in your well-being. Someone can tell you they love you while consistently making choices that leave you feeling unseen. Presence alone isn't enough. Healthy relationships require participation. They require mutual effort. They require two people who both understand that love is something you practice, not something you merely profess. And here's something that often surprises people. When you finally stop arguing with reality, you experience peace. Not because everything suddenly becomes perfect, not because losing someone never hurts, but because uncertainty ends. Clarity, even painful clarity, is healthier than endless confusion. Knowing where you stand allows you to make decisions. Not knowing keeps you emotionally suspended between hope and disappointment. Life is too valuable to remain suspended. If someone reaches out after a period of silence, don't respond from loneliness, respond from wisdom. Ask yourself simple questions. Has their behavior changed? Is there consistent effort? Do their actions now reflect the respect I've been looking for? If the answer is yes, then perhaps there's room to rebuild. If the answer is no, don't let temporary attention erase long-term patterns. A single message doesn't rewrite months of inconsistency. One good day doesn't erase a habit of emotional absence. Judge relationships by consistency, not by isolated moments that temporarily satisfy your desire to believe. And if they never reach out, then you've received an answer, even if it wasn't spoken. Silence is still communication. The absence of effort is still information. Accepting that truth isn't pessimistic, it's liberating. Because every relationship eventually teaches us something. Some teach us how to love, others teach us what love should never require. Either lesson has value if you're willing to learn it. As we bring this conversation to a close, remember that your life becomes stronger the moment you stop measuring love by our words alone. Measure it by presence, measure it by consistency, measure it by mutual effort, and above all, measure it against the respect you owe yourself. Because in the end, the people who truly belong in your life won't leave you guessing where you stand. Their actions will answer the question before you ever have to ask it.